Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jacqueline Dorsey of Lean Frontiers and I'll serve as your host today. I'm excited to bring to you today a short webinar on Lean Sales and Marketing facilitated by Bill Waddell. This session is being recorded, so if you want to refer back to it later. So for now, let me turn things over to Bill.
Good morning, everybody, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of their Friday to spend a few minutes talking with me, listening to me anyway, about the role of sales and marketing in Lean. And hopefully in our brief period here, we can give you a few things to think about. But the title is very appropriate. Lean very much matters to sales and marketing, and there really can't be Lean without sales and marketing. Well, let me spend a few minutes telling you why that's the case. You know, in going over this, there really are three fundamental points that I want to try to make here this morning. That sales and marketing have three critical roles in this whole thing. One of them is to serve as the voice of the customer, so the rest of the organization understands how best to create customer value. You know, Lean is all about eliminating waste, and waste is anything that the customer doesn't perceive as value. With sales and marketing being the customer-facing people, the ones interacting with them the most. If the organization is really going to understand what waste is, sales and marketing needs to be very much involved in helping them define that. Second, to drive strategic pricing in a manner that assures profits and works for the customers. And there is a fundamentally different approach to pricing in a Lean environment than there is in a traditional standard cost-based company. And finally, to drive sales volumes in a manner that's consistent with capacity. Capacity is really cost, and Lean is all about creating capacity. Sales and marketing has to be very tightly integrated in order to know how to sell that capacity. So let me talk a little bit more about each of those three. Kind of Lean 101 is that you have some total amount of cost in your company, and some of it is spent creating value for customers, and some of it is waste. And you hear a lot in Lean about eliminating waste, and that really is a subject that needs to be explored much more, and sales and marketing really needs to play a critical role in that. Typically, we would try to set prices based on those total costs, but the big problem is the customer is not too interested in paying for waste. Kind of a traditional, very simple-minded kind of an approach to Lean is that we're going to eliminate waste and drive down cost. Now, that really doesn't work too well. Most of that cost are really people. When you eliminate meetings and material handling and improve defects and don't need so much quality control. Now, the only way that really translates into a cost reduction is if you get rid of the people that used to be doing those things. But if all of them are still on the payroll, just doing something else, you really haven't saved any money. What we're really trying to do is have all of those people spending more time doing things that customers will pay for. But we're not really looking to get rid of people. That kind of flies right in the face of the fundamentals of the Lean culture. So if we're not going to get rid of people, and we're not really going to reduce the cost, then what we're going to do is create more value. And by creating more value with the same people, the same equipment, the same resources, we should be able to do one of two things: either charge higher prices for our products because they're more valuable, or we got to be able to sell more of them. But either way, we're going to be driving up the top line. We're going to be driving up revenue. Lean is really a growth strategy, not a cost reduction strategy, and that's a real misconception a lot of people have. But you can't obviously grow the business without sales, selling more or commanding higher prices. Sales needs to be a big part of this whole effort to figure out how we're going to create more value and then sell that value to more customers or for higher prices to the existing customers. But one way or another, it's all about growth, and there can't be any growth without the salespeople being very involved. So if this is really what we're trying to do here, is not spend any less money, but be able to create greater value for customers, higher sales revenues, as a result of our lean efforts. And we really find that increasing value adding is the goal here. And that means that the value adding ratio is really a key measure of lean. How much more value are we creating? And then that value that we've created is really only going to flow to the bottom line if sales knows how to take that and sell it. So there has to be a sales strategy for taking this increased value to customers. And that's going to drive just about everything I talk about here this morning. Now, the first point I made was that sales and marketing has to be the voice of the customer. And you'll find that with your company that there are some things that are clearly value-adding. The direct materials that go into your product, the direct labor it takes, and the cost of operating the machines to turn those materials into something useful for customers. And at the other end, there are things that everybody understands are clearly waste, creating scrap and defects, having to inspect things to make sure we did it right the first time, a lot of paper pushing and material handling. There's no question in anybody's mind that those are the wastes in the organization. But there tends to be an awful lot of room for discussion in between. And in most companies, there's not a real clear understanding of exactly what is waste and what isn't. For a lot of reasons, all of us being the human beings that we are, we tend to see the waste in other people's areas a whole lot clearer than we can see ours. And we also get confused with things like the idea that something is necessary as being value-adding, and that's just not the case. Sales and marketing really need to be the key people to help define this for the organization, and I can describe it for you this way. You go to the local store, and there are 2 bottles of water there. One's $4 and one's $3. Assuming they both have the same volume of water in them, then you ask the fundamental question, why the extra dollar? And if you're trying to sell that $4 bottle of water, and the customer is asking, well, what's the extra dollar for? If your answer is things like, well, we have a computer system that we have to pay for, we have meetings that we have to pay for, we have defects, we have packaging, our water comes from a long way away, so we have transportation costs, we have a big advertising budget we have to pay for. You know, if those are the kinds of answers you give, the customer's going to say, well, no, thank you. None of that's doing anything for me. I'll take the $3 bottle. Now, on the other hand, if your answer to that is because of the quality of the water, because of the durability of it, it's more likely to stay fresh longer with the cap that we use, because of the ease of drinking from the bottle that we use, things that are useful to the customer, then the customer might say, yeah, I'll pay the extra dollar for those things. But that really is the acid test. It's not a question of what you think you have to spend or the cost that your company incurs as a result of a lot of management decisions that you've made. You really need to be defining value in terms of what things that you spend money on will give customers a reason to want to pay more for your product or to buy more of your product than the other guys if all other things are equal. That's what we're really talking about when we get into eliminating waste and creating value for customers. And this whole idea of waste being anything that doesn't add value really comes down to that simple kind of equation. And you do that all the time when you go into Walmart or someplace, there are a couple of products there at a couple of price points, and you're looking at those and you're really saying, is the one that's a higher price creating more value for me? Is the quality better? Does it do a better job for me? Is it liable to last longer? And if the answer is no, then you go with a lower cost product. Sales and marketing needs to be the ones that are really telling the organization what customers will pay for and what they won't, what the things the company is spending money on can be passed on to customers, and customers will gladly pay that because they think it's worth something to them. This can be a pretty traumatic experience for most companies. When you find out that executives don't add value, and accounting departments, and actually the whole marketing department probably doesn't add any value. The other thing that adds even less value, of course, are lean consultants. But those of us who are in these clearly non-value adding areas really need to be well aware of that, and the company needs to be well aware of what's not adding value. And the only justification for spending those areas is because we believe that by those efforts we can do things to help the folks that actually are creating value. But your company needs to have a real clear understanding, and that needs to be part of the parlance of the company. That they talk about costs not in terms of direct and variable and overhead and departmental budget, but to have people start to talk about costs and activities in terms of value adding and non-value adding. And the salespeople have to be the ones that lead that effort because they know the customers better. They're closer to the customers. And in far too many companies, the sales and marketing organization is really not engaged in that. And as a result, you just kind of leave it to people in production or in engineering or in accounting to assume what customers want and what they don't want. But this is really kind of the first in line of involvement that the sales and marketing folks really have to drive, is a real clear understanding of what creates value for customers, what's the good stuff and what doesn't. The next point is that of strategic pricing. Old school thinking, really accounting thinking, that really is all about numbers and not really about common sense and the realities out in the marketplace, is that you should take cost and you should tack on whatever profit or margin you want to make, and that should become the price. And sales and marketing quite often is tasked with taking that price out to the marketplace and trying to convince somebody to pay it. In lean thinking, there's a fundamentally different approach. Really looking at this more from a common sense perspective, but saying the price is actually not up to accounting, it's not up to sales and marketing, it's not really up to you, that the market determines the price. The value that you're creating, the competition, the nature of the product you're selling determines the price. And at the end of the day, customers will determine the price. They're the ones who are going to decide what something is worth and what it's not worth. And obviously we want the highest price we can. But the price needs to be driven by the market. And that in turn is largely driven by how good the product is, and often how good it is relative to the other options that the customer has or the competition. Now, unless you're a nonprofit or running a charity, profit's not really an option either. I suspect that whoever owns the company has some pretty clear expectations of what he or she expects to take out of this thing. So you don't really control the price, and you don't really control the profit. The only thing you control is the cost. Now, the prices that it takes for your sales and marketing strategy to succeed need to really be driven by the strategy, by what it is you're trying to sell, who you're trying to sell it to, and how much of it you're trying to sell. And it really requires a lot of knowledge on the part of the sales and marketing people. And sometimes you find that the sales and marketing folks have all of the necessary data. Quite often they don't. But they need to really understand the size of the market, the competition. They need to really be coming back and telling the company with a great deal of clarity and really knowing the market that this is the price, the maximum price that it will take for us to succeed in whatever our strategy is, whatever market we're going after, whatever we're trying to grow, whatever product we're trying to sell. But they need to be driving the price from the market, doing that based on facts, not based on what's easy to sell, but based on the facts, and really knowing what it's worth to the customer and what the competition is doing. And coming back and saying, in order for our strategy to succeed, this has to be the price. We take profit from that, and then the organization is tasked with putting in place a cost structure for that to succeed. And in most companies, that's not nearly as hard as they think it is, because a huge chunk of those costs that keep the math from working are non-value adding costs. They're the costs that we've plowed into the organization that really aren't necessary. And once we've done that, then we know what lean can go after and what it should go after. how much cost do we need to take out of this in order for the business to succeed. But it's pointless for us to fail because we've created prices that only make sense on an accounting spreadsheet, but don't work out in reality and in the marketplace. But sales has a great deal of responsibility here. This is no simple task. They're really determining in large measure the profitability of the company by how well they can come back and say, these are the prices. And they're the highest prices that they can be. But they're based on value and they're based on the competition. And we're quite certain that we can execute our sales strategy with this price structure. Then the burden goes on the rest of the organization to go make that a success. But that strategic pricing input is the second critical input from sales and marketing to lean. And without this, the rest of the organization doesn't really know what to go work on. The combination of what costs have to come out, and the first point there about what's non-value added, those two things come together and tell the rest of the organization that all of your Kaizen events, all of your lean efforts, all of the things that you start going after in order to take waste out of the organization, it tells the rest of the organization what those need to be in order for lean to translate into very profitable growth. And without that, you just have the rest of the organization just kind of stumbling around looking for something that looks like waste that may or may not tie back to all of this, and quite often it doesn't. So that's point number 2, strategic pricing. And it's really incumbent on sales and marketing to drive that. In the end, it really comes back to that model that I showed you before. When we replace wasteful activities with value-creating activities, what we're really doing is creating capacity. We're creating the ability to sell more. The third point that sales and marketing needs to be very aware of and very focused on is the idea that we're freeing up capacity. They need to know how much capacity are we freeing up and how are we going to sell it? Who are we going to sell it to? And standard costing and traditional accounting measures won't tell you that. The big weakness, among many huge weaknesses, but probably the biggest weakness, is that standard costing doesn't understand capacity. It tells you that the cost is the same no matter what the volume is. And when volumes are changing, the costs, all those allocated costs and standard costing become even more meaningless than they were to start with. Sales and marketing really needs to understand and be tied into the factory as it frees up capacity to sell that. Let me show you this chart here. Here are two companies, both experiencing some kind of annual growth. One's profitable and one isn't. The one that's profitable is the one chart that looks like this. You can see, here in year 2, we've way oversold our capacity. When we measure sales and look at sales isolated from production, isolated from capacity, and we encourage sales to believe that all increases in sales are good, regardless of anything else, then we're really doing enormous damage to the company. In this case, by overselling our capacity, that means we're driving lots of overtime, we're driving lots of hiring, and all of the inefficiencies and learning curves that go along with that. We're probably creating a lot more defects. We're creating big supply chain problems, having to expedite a lot of stuff, air freight stuff in because we're selling way more than we had put capacity in to sell, and really creating a lot of inefficiencies and driving a lot of cost into the company as a result of misalignment of sales and capacity. An increase in sales over and above what we planned and what we put capacity in for is not a good thing. And it's kind of a head scratcher there that quite often you'll find that while sales is driving volumes in at greater numbers than the factory can handle, we're actually giving them bonuses and rewards and greater commissions and patting them on the back for creating a huge cost problem. You know, we go out here and look at year 5 on this chart, and now we've got just the opposite problem. Where as a result of sales that look good, we put in a higher capacity level, as the blue line shows, and now we have an off year. And we're doing just the opposite. Now we're laying people off, we're underutilizing machines, we're creating big cost problems back in the supply chain when we shut it down. You know, we're putting the company back into a bad cost position. The most profitable the company can ever be is when sales and capacity are in perfect alignment. When we're selling what we can make, no more, no less. When you start to vary from the capacity line, you start to create big cost problems, quality problems, inventory problems from one end of the supply chain to the other, but particularly on the manufacturing floor. That's why it's important that sales and production be in alignment with the plan. And so we're not driving lean companies so much to a forecast, so much as to a sales plan. And you really start to tie some of these concepts together. We're not forecasting, which often implies hoping and guessing to sell something. We're actually planning to sell something. That we know the market, we know what we're going after, we've got the pricing that we have analyzed, and we know it's going to be successful. And this is the volume that we're going to drive into the company. And we're going to do that in alignment with capacity. You'll find that companies like Toyota and some of the very lean companies actually use pricing as the dial to assure that that happens, to increase prices when sales are starting to heat up a little bit higher than capacity and what they had planned, and to reduce prices to dial volumes back up when they get headwinds in the marketplace and for whatever reason sales start to drop off. They use pricing as the big magic dial to keep things in total alignment. It's all a concept that's called factory first, and it doesn't mean that the factory is more important. It doesn't mean first in importance or first in priorities. It's saying that manufacturing is a huge cost pit that's very difficult and slow to change, particularly when we've hired people. And if we have a truly lean culture where we're slow to hire and we never lay off, and we're really committed to our people, then that means we have a big unresponsive, relatively unresponsive cost base. Lean tries to improve the responsiveness of it, but there's a limit to how much can be done. And what sales needs to do is all capacity and to slow themselves down and slow the market down when they're overrunning the capacity, and to heat things up when we're underrunning capacity, and to really try to drive the company to that ideal position where we're selling exactly what we've got full capacity to make. And then Lean's job is to continually increase the available capacity by breaking through bottlenecks and constraints, improving the flow, figuring out how every month and every quarter and every year they've got more capacity with the same people and the same machines by eliminating the underutilization and the waste that goes on with those things. So there you have it. The three big vital roles that sales and marketing play in a successful lean company: serve as the voice of the customer. People need to know what customers will pay for and what they won't, and it shouldn't be left to the rest of the organization to guess what's going on out there with the customers. Now, one other point with that is that the sales and marketing folks, typically in order to do this, we're going to have to go beyond the buyer at the customer's organization. You think about your own company and how much do your buyers really know about the details of how things flow and what's going on with your customers. And it's not to disparage the buyers, but they tend to be a little bit limited. In order for the sales folks to really accomplish that and to find value, they need to get their tentacles as deep into the customer's organization as they possibly can, and find ways to learn from whoever's actually using your product and who's selling your product at your customer's organization, to really get beyond the front gates with the customer's organization and really understand how you can create more value, how things are really used, what the folks within that organization really know and think about what can make your product more valuable. But that's task number one, and it's a pretty basic one. And if you don't take anything from this webinar at all, I think you'll find it very interesting for your organization if you just do this. Just have the sales marketing folks lead an exercise where you take all of your chart of accounts or your budget or something that lists all the different things you spend money on, and lead a discussion with management folks from all the different functions about whether things are value adding or not. And that'll help you, one, really understand how little consensus there is in the company, and to help stimulate the right discussions and start to change the culture in the company to one that's more focused on creating value for customers. Two, drive strategic pricing. And in order to drive strategic pricing, the sales and marketing folks have to go way beyond, kind of an old school traditional approach to sales that's all about relationships and being friends with customers. It really requires fact-based selling. It requires a lot of data. It requires the sales and marketing folks to really understand the market, understand the competition, to understand everybody else's prices, and to really understand what customers are willing to pay for. And then finally, for the sales and marketing folks to be very close to production and accounting and developing and understanding exactly what the full capacity is, and to make sure that their sales plans and their sales strategy are synchronized with capacity, and that they're using things like SOFT and some of the lean accounting techniques to continually redial that and to make sure that capacity and sales are in as close to alignment as we possibly can. And this tends to be a huge cultural change for most companies of all the things we've talked about. The big problem with sales and marketing is that quite often they're completely disconnected from the rest of the company, that they're off doing their thing, selling as much as they can of whatever they can to whoever they can, and leaving the rest of the company to try to follow them around, dragging that great big factory up the mountain and down the valley, trying to keep up with them. And this third point is really the huge leap for most companies, for them to say, sometimes we're going to deliberately slow down sales because we're way overrunning the capacity that we plan to put in. And in the long run, there's far more harm than good that comes from that. So those are the 3 points. Hopefully, I've been able to make them here this morning in a way that makes some sense and gives people some things to think about. Certainly love to discuss any and all of these with any of you folks anytime I can be of any help. I understand that due to the nature of this, we haven't set up a facility to handle questions and answers the way we normally would. But if you have any questions or concerns, if there's anything that didn't make a lot of sense here, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, and to I'll be glad to try to expound on it and to help you out in any way I can. So appreciate your time this morning once again, and hope everybody has a good rest of their week and a very good weekend. So thank you very much for listening to me.
All right. Well, Bill, thank you for facilitating our session today. As mentioned previously, today's webinar is being recorded. Look for an email following our time together for a link to the recording. Feel free to share this throughout your organization. So again, thank you, Bill, and thanks to each of you for participating in today's session. Goodbye.